Chuck. Hey Chuck, I need you to do your thing again for me. Remember what you told me you could do last week? Go ahead. Well, just do it just for fun.
Thank you.
That's pathetic. All right. All right. Okay. I would like to get a volunteer, please, to open our time. Did I spit on somebody last week?
Thanks, Scott. I'll open up our time.
That would be great, Jeff. Okay, so it really is generally safe up here. It's just like church. You come late, you got to sit up in the front. All right, Jeff, go ahead.
Lord Jesus, I just want to thank you for the opportunity on Wednesday night to put ourselves and our activities aside to come and learn more about you in the book of Job. Lord, I just thank you for Scott's dedication in teaching this class and for the wonderful Christian brothers and sisters that I have in this church, and for everybody to have an outreach here. And Father, we just give this time to you, Lord. And thank you for being our dad and loving us. And most of all, Father, the love comes from you and not mankind. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jeff. That's a great prayer.
No problem.
All right. I did something very rude last week. I asked someone to look up that verse, and then I forgot to ask them to read it. Who looked that up? Was it you, Heath?
I did.
I don't feel as bad.
Yeah,
Okay, now just kidding. Would you?
I haven't shouted it out.
No, I'm okay. So I'm at the age now. I'm not going to tell you how old I am. It'll probably slip out sometime during class, but I'm at the age that I just forget stuff like that, but then typically I remember it later. Like after class, I'll think of, there's 3 things I meant to say tonight, and I don't remember what they are. So I will try to remember when I do that if I think it's important to cover it the next week. And what I wanted to explain is why I probably look up here like I need medication. Like, why on earth is this guy this enamored of the book of Job? And this verse really explains that in a way that's better than what I could try to explain. So Heath, what would you read it loud? Speak loud.
The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in the field, which a man found and hid again. And from joy over it he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field.
Okay, so the guy found his treasure, right? And he buried it, and he ran to town to try to buy the field where nobody knew the treasure was in there. I feel like a guy who's found the treasure in this book. But I really think I see things in the book, and I've looked for people online that would see the same stuff that I see in the book, which I'm going to explain to you over these 6 weeks, and I don't find anything. So rather than I can't buy the book of Job, I can't put a lock on it, right, from a title standpoint. And I'm not really trying to do that. Rather than that, I want to get the word out. I'm so excited about this and what I see in there that I want to share it with people. And I am elated to have all of you in class. There are roughly, I understand, 50 people on the roster for this class. This is easily the largest class I've ever had at Impact. How many of you did I personally rush to take this class? Some of you, I know. No question about it. So I can do the math, but I want someone else to do the math. You're going to be in here for 9 hours apiece. If there are 50 people and you're going to be in here 9 hours apiece, how many total man hours is that? Oh, who said that? Okay, Nathan. All right, Nathan got it. 450. I can tell you, I take that very seriously. You are giving me 450 hours of your time over these 6 weeks. I am very grateful for that. I'm going to put in 9 hours teaching. I've put in a lot more than that preparing. I don't think my total preparation time is as high yet as 450 hours, unless maybe we could go back and count the time I spent reading Job before I started to see all this stuff in it. I really don't think it's 450 hours. So this is a multiple you're giving back to me, and I'm going to do my best to make good use of your time for these next 5 weeks. And I just want you to know that I'm very appreciative of you giving me that time. I'm to the age, and a lot of you know exactly what I'm talking about, that I know time is our most precious resource. It just is. And I'm very appreciative of the investment you're making to be here. All right. We're going to jump to page 3 of your outline. Does everyone have, by the way, this week's outline? You should have picked an outline up off the table. We may or may not get to that tonight. If we don't, it's okay. If we do, it's great. You'll notice this week's outline says, at the bottom of the first page, page 1 of 47. But there are only 10 pages. The outline this week, it is 47 pages long. But I have to go through it. I want to go through it one more time, and I'm making a few little revisions to it from the last time I taught this class. And I only got to page 10, but I know we won't make it to page 10 tonight, so I know that's far enough. Next week, you should probably get pages 11 through 47 of that outline. So I just want you to know, 47 is not a mistake. That's how many pages it takes to give you the rest of the book. And that's what you're going to have with all these kind of little markings and stuff on it. All right, so tonight, if you look at the top, we're on the outline that you got last week that says sessions 1 and 2. Is everybody with me there? Everyone on page 3. And basically, we're at Job chapter 1. So what we're going to do tonight, I don't have any cool video for you on the TV this time. We're just going to talk about the text. We're going to talk about things that I've noted in here, and we're going to discuss it. And I'm going to count on you for some input. Please forgive me if I feel I need to move the class along. We must finish chapter 3 tonight. I have to get that far. If we get further, that's great, but we have to get that far. So, by the way, over the last week, I also checked pronunciation. Some people call it the land of Uz. Some people call it the land of Uz. Probably it's the rednecks that call it Uz. I live in Oklahoma. I'm going with Uz. Is that okay with everybody? Yeah. Probably the more learned people may call it Uz. I'm really not sure. I've just always thought of it as Uz, so I'm going to go with Uz. So we covered a little bit of this last week. I want someone to look up Ezekiel 14:14 again, and someone look up James 5:11. Who look up the Ezekiel passage? Quick. Okay, Bobby, thank you. And then James 5:11. Ed, that'd be great. Rob, I'll call on you for another one. If you look down, Rob, there's Revelation 12:10. If you could look that one up, that'd be great. So there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His possessions also were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very great household. Some translations say, like many manservants and maidservants. A very great household. So this man was the greatest of all the children in the East. Who's writing this? Who wrote that? Who said that? Yeah, we don't know who the author is, but it's inspired by God. We don't know who the author is of the book of Job, but it's inspired by God. His sons went and held a feast in the house of each one on his birthday, and they sent and called for 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. It was so, when the days of their feasting had run their course, that Job sent and sanctified them, and he rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and renounced God in their hearts." Job did so continually. Was Job a real person? I know we covered some of this last week, but we're just going to start right in here on chapter 1. How do we know Job was a real person? He's mentioned other places in the Bible, these 2 specifically. So Ezekiel 14:14, Bobby, you had that one?
Even though these 3 men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in its midst, by their own righteousness, they could only deliver themselves, declares the Lord God.
Okay, so Ezekiel, remind me again, was it Noah?
Noah, Daniel, and Job.
Noah, Daniel, and Job, Ezekiel refers to as real people. Do we think that Noah was a real person? Do we think Daniel was a real person? Is there any conceivable reason to think that Job would have been lumped in with the other 2 if he wasn't a real person? I think there's no argument that Job wasn't a real person. There's no real argument that the book is allegory. I absolutely think everything in the book that we're going to read actually happened the way it's described in the book. How about James 5:11?
Yeah, James 5:11 says, "Behold, we count those blessed who endured. You have heard of the endurance of Job, and have seen the outcome of the Lord's dealings, that the Lord is full of compassion and is merciful."
Okay, so here again, James, New Testament, also refers to Job as a real person. By the way, last week I mentioned that we don't really know when the events took place. Some people think maybe it was 2000 BC. That's about as old as the estimates seem to get. Some people think it's as recently as 700 to 400 BC. That seems to be as recent as it gets. I realized last week, and I've meant to do this on several occasions and then forgotten, I realized last week that since Ezekiel refers to Job, it might be worthwhile to see when Ezekiel was written. And there's a lot of certainty about when Ezekiel was written. It was roughly 600 BC. So I think it's interesting that I've got at least one book on Job that speculates that the date of Job's events may have been 400 BC, when Ezekiel was written in 600 BC, and he referred to Job. Now, on the other hand, I should go back and look at that book. Maybe the book is talking about when the events were put to writing, as opposed to when they happened. I don't really remember. But as I remembered, I think that book was speculating that maybe the events that happened were as recently as 400 BC. That can't be if Ezekiel referred to Job, and it was written around 600 BC. Anyway, do we need to know when it was written? Do we need to know when it happened? We don't. Do we need to know exactly where it happened? Not really. We're going to talk about where it happened a little bit more tonight, because there are a couple of really interesting things that stem from that. But it's not critical to know for sure when or where it happened. What else do we know from these first few verses, 1 through 5? What do we know about Job? He was rich. He was wealthy. He was well known, right? He was the greatest of all. What does it say? He was the greatest of all the children of the East. What else do we know about him?
He feared God.
He feared. How do we know that? He feared God. Sacrificed for his sons. What was he worried about?
They might sin.
That they might have sinned, and specifically he was worried about what? Right? How they felt about who? He was worried about how his children might have felt about God. Whether or not, in this translation, I really like this one that says renounced. This one, by the way, is this the net or the web? This is the web. This is the World English Bible. Most of the outline is the net. I don't remember what that stands for, but it's an available translation on the internet. I have a problem with copyright. I probably would use the NIV, but I'm not allowed to by their copyright restrictions. The last few chapters I pulled from the NIV. But most of the outline is the net Bible. These first two are the web Bible. Anyway, I like this. It says renounce. Some translations say maybe they cursed God in their hearts. So we're going to see the word renounced is used throughout here, and this is a really important word. Whether it's cursed or renounced, it's really important. So Job was worried about what his kids might have done. Now, let's jump down to the next section. Oh, sorry, on the right I put a couple definitions there from Webster Online. Blameless seems obvious enough, means free from guilt or blame. Upright means conforming to a high standard of morality or virtue. And renounce, I like this definition. This is really helpful. To refuse to follow, obey, or recognize any further. To repudiate. It is to cut ties, to turn your back on, to say, I'm not linked with you anymore. I no longer subscribe to that relationship with you. Job was worried that his sons might have done that. Now, verse 6. On the day when God's sons came to present themselves before Yahweh, Satan also came among them. Yahweh said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered Yahweh and said, from going back and forth in the earth and from walking up and down in it. Yahweh said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him in the earth, a blameless and upright man. There it is again. One who fears God and turns away from evil. All right, let's just stop right there. What's mind-boggling about what we just read? There are several things to me that are mind-boggling about what I just read.
Well, for one, he was well regarded by God.
He was well regarded by God.
No one like him.
Yes. All right, say that louder, Ron.
No one like him.
It says there is no one like him. No one like him in the earth. How would you paraphrase that? What's God saying about Job? One of a kind, and specifically, now one of a kind can mean a lot of things, right? That's Kathy that said that, right? Okay, Kathy. So one of a kind can mean a lot of things. Maybe complimentary, maybe not. Exceptional.
He was God's number one.
Who said that? Mardell. Say that louder.
Well, you said it last week, that he's God's number one man.
I gave away my own thing last
Yes,
week?
I
All right.
know.
I gave away my own thing. He was number one. Right? Look what God says. Blameless and upright, fears God and turns away from evil. There is no one like him in the earth. I absolutely think we can paraphrase that. He is my number one guy. This is God talking. He is my number one God. Now, we also noticed this last week. Who names Job? God. Did Satan come and say, let me pick on Job? Who named him? Okay. I want you to let that sink in for a minute. Because most people I talk to, first of all, most people I talk to really know almost nothing about this book at all. If they know anything, the stereotypical misunderstanding is that who named Job? Satan. The average person, if they know just a little bit about the book, I'm not blaming them, I'm not trying to be offensive or mean-spirited, but I'm just being matter of fact. If someone doesn't know much about the book, they probably think, if they know enough that Satan took away all Job's stuff, they probably think Satan singled Job out. The mere fact that God singled him out, to me, that blows my mind. And why did he single him out?
Because he knew he wouldn't succumb to sickness.
I think that's right. I think that's exactly right, Chuck. But let's just stay with the passage right here for the time being. Why was Job singled out? Because you're all over it, but let's boil it right down. Because he was his number one man. That is no coincidence. Now, how would you like to be God's number one man? Right? Yeah. Right. I'm gonna circle the wagons on this again in week 6 when we talk about what my opinion is about kind of why all this happened and who it's for. Yeah, Mary.
God says, where did you come from? Satan. God knows where everybody is all the time.
Of course.
So he knew Satan was out and somebody else.
But God does that all throughout Scripture, and Jesus did the same thing. They ask questions that they already know the answers to, right? But here we get the benefit of seeing the dialogue. But there's no question, you're right, God already knew the answer to that. So again, I'm going to give you the same paraphrase to this that I gave you last week. So what happens is God is having his meeting. This one, I think, to say this, God's sons came. Some translations say angels came. Angels came to God, and I don't know how these things get scheduled. I didn't have Outlook probably, but I don't know. There's a meeting, and the angels are there, and you know what? Satan comes also. So my paraphrase is, God says to Satan, "What you been up to?" Satan says, "Oh, just been hanging out, checking everything out on the earth." God says, and again, I want you to understand the import and the gravity of this. God says, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him in the earth. That is very much counter to a lot of messages in our culture, and certainly counter to a lot of the messages we get in evangelical Christianity today. Because Job was picked out by God, we know from what we saw last week, for unbelievable suffering. I truly think nobody has suffered like Job apart from Jesus Christ himself. I really think no man has ever suffered as much as Job suffered in terms of everything he lost. Like we talked about last week, there's 2 clear rounds, and I really think there's a 3rd round we can add to that, apart from Jesus Christ himself. And he went through all this because he was God's number one man. If that wasn't the case, God wouldn't have said it. That can only be the reason, because he was God's number one man. So, yeah.
I mean, I just noticed this. I'm surprised that this is okay. That Satan, I don't know where they are, but Satan like, appears before the throne,
Right.
and somehow God is okay with this sin entering his domain.
I agree with you, Bobby. Yes, that's another mind bender, isn't it? To imagine the two of them talking like that. Yeah, I agree with you.
But First John said that he's there accusing all the time.
True.
So it's not.
Say that louder, Rick. Say that louder.
1 John 2 said that Jesus is our advocate and Satan is our accuser.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's not an unusual right
Yeah.
now. Old and new.
So there is some interaction there. Yep. All right. Then let's read on. Satan answered Yahweh and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Haven't you made a hedge around him and around his house and around all that he has on every side? You bless the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But stretch out your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will renounce you to your face." Yahweh said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only on himself don't stretch out your hand." So, again, my paraphrase of this is Satan's, what did Satan basically say to start this off? What did I tell you last week? Anyone remember? I want you all to do this with me. Right? All right, so God says, if you consider Job, he's my number one guy. Satan says, look at him, you gave him all this stuff. Anybody would worship you if you had all that stuff. If you took all this stuff away, he won't be lined up with you anymore. That'll be the end of it. So, God says what? He says, have at it. What else do we learn right here?
Don't kill him.
He says, don't touch him. What do we learn from that?
That still keeps the boundaries.
God sets the boundaries, right? I can tell you, I mean, I believe Satan is a real person. I don't think he's omnipresent. I don't think he's omniscient, but I think he's very, very powerful. I think we make a mistake as Christians not to take Satan seriously. But we need not fear him. We can have the complete confidence that he's on a leash. God decides how far he can go and where he must stop. And we see that demonstrated both here and in chapter 2. So, God says, okay, all that he has is in your power. On himself, don't stretch out your hand. Who had Revelation? Was that you, Rob? Revelation 12:10.
Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, "Now have come salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down."
Okay, so this is back to Rick's point. Satan is our accuser. And here Satan is accusing Job directly in front of God. You know, Rick, is there another place in the scriptures where we see that actually happen, like with a particular person? I can't think of one. I've never made an effort to make a study of that, but
John in 1 John says it happens all the time.
yeah. So we know it happens. But here we actually see it playing out with regard to a real person. It plays out here with regard to Job. All right, now, notice I've got just a little arrow there on the word renounce. Much later in the class, we're going to come back to these first 3 chapters, and we're going to look at a lot of things that tie together in a way that I don't think we can see yet until we've worked our way through the rest of the book. But that word renounce is going to be very important later. So, at the bottom of page 3, Satan went out from the presence of Yahweh on a day that his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the oldest brother's house. There came a messenger to Job. We went through this last week. How many messengers came?
3.
How many?
3.
It was 4. What you may be remembering is that 3 interrupted the one before, but somebody had to start. So 3 times it says, while he was yet speaking, another messenger came. Now, how long did it take us to read? I had 4 volunteers in class last week go through the messenger's parts. How long did that take us in class? 26 seconds. Now, again, what's my number?
36.
My number's 36. And again, we're doing all this in English. None of this actually happened in English. I'm sure Job never heard of English, neither did his messengers. We don't know how long it took. My oldest son Eric and I have interacted on this quite a bit. He's a great sort of sounding board for me on stuff like this. He pointed out that after they'd run, right, each one said he was what? There was too many people. That was good. I like the participation. Somebody speak up a little. Each one said he was the only one that escaped. Whatever he came to report on, each messenger said, I am the only one who's escaped to tell you. Now that is a person who feels the angst, right? The adrenaline's up. They probably have run. There wasn't any other way to get around. I mean, all the animals that they came to report on were killed. So they probably have all run from wherever they were to wherever Job was. And my oldest son points out if they're out of breath, it may have taken them a little longer to speak. So what's the total time anyway? What's the upper limit we could say this all happened for Job? Right? 1 minute. I'm going to say within 1 minute, Job heard 4 messages that would change his life forever. His life would never again be the same. The first 3 were bad enough. He lost all of his stuff, all of his animals. The last one, he lost what? He lost his children to a wind that came up from the desert and blew the house down of his oldest son where they were having the party that particular day. So in 36 seconds, maybe it's a minute, maybe it's 26 seconds, somewhere in there, doesn't really matter. In a very, very short time, rapid fire succession, Job lost everything as he knew it. So on the next page, on page 4, you see a little stopwatch. That's the only place you'll see the stopwatch on the outline. That's new, by the way, in this edition. I want you to know you're the first people to see that stopwatch. I want you to write down there however long you thought it took. You can write down a minute, 36 seconds, 26 seconds. You can write down really fast, write down whatever you want. But that's basically why that's there. It was a very, very short time. So from there we'll go on to verse 1. Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell down on the ground and worshiped. What does that tell us right there? Yeah. He may have been crying too, but what does that tell us? What was his first thought? His first thought was God. I don't know, does that blow anyone else's mind? What? So in all seriousness, Marion makes a good, say that a little bit louder.
Well, my first thought would be to curse God or say, how would you do this?
Right. Your first thought would be to be in anguish toward God. How could you do this? That's not what Job did. Tore his robe, shaved his head, fell down on the ground and worshiped. He said, naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. Yahweh gave, and Yahweh has taken away. Blessed be Yahweh's name. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. Any other comments there before we move on? I assume that was a custom, either for mourning or grief, I would guess. We're going to see something later on about ashes, throwing ashes in there. I don't know, Marion. The question is, why did he shave his head? Do you know?
Custom showing grief.
Showing grief? Yeah.
Showing grief.
Yeah. You know, they didn't have Gillette back then either. I mean, even that was probably something to get done. I mean, think about it. You know, we no big deal. I mean, I'd look funny going to work, but it'd be easy for me to do. I don't think that was so easy for him. That's what he did. All right, chapter 2. Again, on the day when the gods, sons, or angels came to present themselves before Yahweh, Satan also came among them to present himself before Yahweh. We have a repeat, the same conversation. The first part of this is basically identical. Right? God says, Satan, what you been doing? Satan says, well, I've just been roaming around checking everything out. Yahweh said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him in the earth, just what he said before, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. Now, notice this. he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without cause. I'm so tempted to say more about that tonight. You're going to have to wait till week 5 or 6. The import of what we learn about these conversations in these first 2 chapters, in light of the rest of the book, the next 40 chapters, is way more mind-boggling than anything we will have talked about last week or this week. I can guarantee you. And I do not want to let this cat out of the bag before it's ready to come out. The baby is not ready to come out yet. It'll be there in a few weeks. Heath?
Have you given any thought, or do you know maybe from later on, what kind of time period is between that first thing and then it says in another day, but not like it doesn't say like the next day, but how much time had passed?
We have a little bit more of a clue, which we'll see tonight, on how long it took for his friends to get there.
Okay.
But I really don't think we have any idea how long it took between the time he lost everything and the time Satan talked to God again. I don't think we did. I don't think we have any idea.
Right.
So, what did Satan say? Oh, go ahead. Do you have a question, Stephanie?
Well, I just wanted to make sure that you and the me in that sentence is, so Job still maintains his integrity, although he's talking about God with the you.
No, this is God talking. That's a great question. No, I think it's worth looking at. Worth stopping there. God is saying to Satan, you, Satan, incited me, God, against him, Job, to ruin him without cause. Now, does anyone have a problem with that? It'd be easier to have a problem with it if it wasn't God talking, right? It'd be a little easier.
Easier to be okay if you had cause.
Sure it would be. And God even says, there was no cause. Right there he says there was no cause. Right? We already knew he was God's #1 guy. Here he says again the exact same thing. No one like him in the earth. You incited me to ruin him without cause. Without cause. I can tell you, some of the more, to me they're kind of oddball. I'm sure they don't think they're oddball. But to me some of the more oddball theories I see on Job was that Job needed to learn a lesson. And you can't support that from the text. You can't get there. God said he's my #1 guy, and he says without cause. Right? Job didn't need to learn. I'm not saying he didn't learn anything. I'm sure he did. In fact, we're going to see that he did. In fact, when we see what happens with Job at the end of the book, it is one of the most beautiful things in the book. But of all the people on the earth, did anyone need to learn a lesson less than Job? Does that have too many negatives in it, or whatever that was? Are you all with me? Like, nobody needed to learn a lesson less than Job. Nobody was closer to God. God himself said so. You can't get to the idea that Job did something wrong, God was dealing with him for something, and yet I read that every once in a while. You can't get there. It's just not there. In fact, just the opposite is there in this book. So, Satan answered the outlaws. Was someone else going to say something? Yeah, go ahead.
You have keen ears. There's
that's all. That's right. Okay, go ahead.
Scott, who did the ruining?
Who did the ruining?
Yeah.
So who did the ruining? Let's ask the question. From the text, what do we know?
Satan.
Satan did it. Satan did it. Now there's a couple things later in the book that are really interesting. They're going to flow from that. But for now, we're going to stay with these first 3 chapters. Satan did it. But Satan did not single him out. Right? I mean, this whole thing, I don't know. I hope I'm taking you along with me here. This whole thing to me is mind-boggling. Satan didn't single him out. God singled him out. But he let Satan ruin him. And that's the right word. And God uses the same word. He let Satan ruin him.
I'm just trying to decide if that's what the sentence sounded like.
There's no question. There's no question. Yeah. Satan went out and did the
Yeah.
stuff. It says Satan went out and he
Right.
wreaked the havoc.
Yeah, it's just weird the wording that says incite. God was incited.
Yes. Okay. So let's talk about that. Do we think God can really be incited? Can God be tempted to do something that he's not willing to do? But I find in the scriptures sometimes God uses phrases like that where we know he can't be tempted like that. I'll just give you an example. This may not be analogous to you, but it is to me. In John chapter 4, Jesus meets the woman at the well. And he asks her a question. What was the question he asked her? Where's your husband? Did he already know the answer to that question?
Sure.
Of course he did. Did he need to ask her the question? He didn't need, you know what? He didn't need to ask anyone any question. Really, his entire life. But he asked this lady, where is your husband? Why did he do that? Yeah, who needed him to ask the question? She did.
Just like Adam and Eve.
Right? And what does she say? What's her first answer to the question? I don't have a husband. Was that fact? It was fact. Was that the complete, like what's the thing they say in court? The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. It wasn't. Did Jesus know that? Of course he did. He already knew the answer before he asked her the question. He says, you've had 5 men, you've had 5 husbands, and the men you're with, I think we know what that probably means. The man you're with now is not your husband. What you've said is quite true. He asked her because she needed to have that interaction with him. Now, did Satan need this? I don't really think so. I'm not here to explain that, but Bobby, I think you picked up on something really interesting. God says to Satan, right? It's not Satan saying, I incited you to do this. God says it. God says to Satan, you incited me to ruin him with no reason. I can't explain why God said that. I think it's very interesting. I don't believe it for a second that our great God can be incited to do anything that he's not willing or interested in doing. But clearly Satan plays a role for the purposes of the book. We're going to say something, Neil?
Yeah, it seems to me that question has something to do with the reason this whole deal happened, because God started it all by mentioning Job started.
Right.
The whole thing has a purpose. I don't know, I'm not sure I know what the purpose, I don't know what the purpose of the
Right.
whole book is. That question seems to me to have something to do with that. Why he would say, you incited me to it.
I think
But
that's
he wanted
right.
to do it anyway.
I think that's completely right. And God wasn't out to ruin Job. Right? I don't think God was on a mission to ruin Job, but of course I think he set all this in motion. Again, you're going to have to wait for week 6 to hear Scott's uneducated opinion on why that is after much reading and study and thought. Sorry, you're going to have to wait for week 6. It's a mini-series. At least it's not like 10 years worth. Okay. Again, what's Satan's answer? What's the first thing Satan basically says? Okay, come on, everybody. Come on.
Looking at him physically.
Well, but what does he say first? He does the same thing again. Look at this. Satan answered Yahweh and said, skin for skin, yes, all that a man has he'll give for his life. You know what he's saying? In the first one he said, of course. Of course he worships you. You gave him all this stuff. Take away his stuff and he won't worship you anymore. Here, Satan says almost the identical thing, except it's already after round 1. So he said, of course, you wouldn't let me touch him. Anybody would still worship you if you only took their stuff. What does that tell us about Satan?
He's a jerk.
Yeah, say it again. Say it again.
He's a jerk.
He's a jerk. Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, I have to put that on the outline. Chip Carroll, April 9th. All right, he's a jerk. Yeah, Karen.
But I wonder if it's because Satan's really after God, because he's trying to provoke God, you stretch out your hand and harm him. You know, he's trying to get God to do the dirty work, basically.
But of course, Satan's happy to do it.
Right.
It just takes go and he's gone. Could be.
He's trying to.
Could be. And I think, there certainly is an element of a cosmic argument going on, and Satan wants to win the argument. It's hard for me to get my mind really wrapped around exactly what the stakes would have been, but it doesn't really matter because God already knew how it was going to turn out. One of the most beautiful things about this book is God absolutely already knew how it's going to turn out. And again, we'll talk about that toward the end of the class.
But it's not a new thing for Satan to goad God into doing things.
Or
It's
to
like-
argue for it.
And well, Jesus and the temptation. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a similar
Yeah,
situation.
yeah, that's true. The temptation of Christ is similar. Yeah, yeah, that's a good point.
God already knew how it's going to turn out. Do you think all the creative intelligences in heaven knew how it was going to turn out?
Don't know.
It sounds like God's credibility is on the line, is what Satan thought.
Could be. I think of a lot of commentary that I read sort of suggests that God's credibility was on the line and Satan could just get this one guy to fall. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around that, but there's a lot of commentators who basically think that's kind of what was at stake. Yeah, Ruby.
Scott, do you have any impression about why Job had the faith that he had? How did he get that? How was he the only guy on the planet with that kind of faith?
I don't, but I would make, the question is, how did Job get his faith? And I would say a couple things. You know, I'm convinced, and I may be wrong, I'm convinced that Eliphaz, one of his friends, like we talked about last week, was a descendant of Esau, some generations after Esau. Esau's oldest son was Eliphaz, his oldest son was Teman. The Eliphaz here is described as Eliphaz the Temanite. So I think he came sometime after that. That suggests, and Eliphaz was none of his friends were godless. They weren't godless people at all. They were wrong. Or they were incomplete, like we talked about last week, but they weren't godless. They were absolutely God-fearing. So that suggests to me that Esau wasn't altogether godless. I typically imagine Esau to be godless, right? Because he was Jacob's twin and he went off on the wrong path. But he was raised in the same house. So I don't really think Esau was godless. I mean, he made a very rash decision about the bowl of stew and all that. I mean, I know. But I don't think he was godless. He was raised right there alongside of Jacob. So I think you have a lot of God-fearing people in this story. Like, I think everybody in the story is God-fearing at the end of the day. What was your, I was going somewhere with that, Ruby. What was your question? How did he get it? How did he get it?
How do you get that faith?
Okay, something else that I'm going to tell you, because this is only a kitten I'm going to let out of the bag. Okay? We're going to see this over the next few weeks. One of the interesting things about this book, Job talks about the Word of God. He talks about God's words. I don't think we have any reason to think this stuff, that he had the written Word of God yet. He may have. We don't know when it was written, but there aren't any real direct references to anything else in God's Word in this book. So I don't think we have any reason to think that when he says, the words of your lips, you know, like David talked about that. Well, David was inspired by God, and they had some writings by them. But Job, the book of Job, doesn't show any evidence of drawing on any other writings. And yet Job refers to the words of your lips and things like that, which we'll see in the book. So somehow, I think they had theology. I think they had belief in God that had been passed down over the generations. I mean, that's what you had until Moses started writing down Genesis, basically. And I think they at least had that. And even if, I think this could have happened after the time of Moses. We don't really know. Even if it happened after Moses, it doesn't look to me like they had the Hebrew written Word of God. Remember, at the time, there's no printing press. I mean, this was no easy thing to pass around. You couldn't just go to Mardell and plunk down $15 and get a Bible. Even the Jewish Bible, you couldn't get that. I mean, this is no easy thing to get your hands on. So I think, Ruby, they just had it. I think they had it from generation to generation, is my own personal thought. Yeah.
Scott, I think this interaction here, to me, tells another big difference between God and Satan.
Yeah.
That is, God knew what was going to happen, and Satan did not. In fact, he expected Job
No question about
to
that.
just curse, and instead he said, blessed be the name.
No question about that. What it's saying is another big difference is Satan did not know what was going to happen, and God did. No question about that. God absolutely set all this up. So, Satan answers Yahweh and says, skin for skin, all that a man has, he'll get for his life. Stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will renounce you to your face. It's interesting to me, he says bone and flesh, because later, as we saw last week, later Job will talk about gnawing pains in his bones. He had bone-deep pain. And here Satan has said, touch his bone. Yahweh said to Satan, behold, he's in your hand, only spare his life. So, Satan went out from the presence of Yahweh and struck Job. Nathan, back to your question of who did it. Satan struck Job with painful sores from the sole of his foot to his head. Some translations say to the crown of his head. All the ones I've looked at say from the sole of his foot. Some of them say to the crown of his head, the top of his head. I love that because, I mean, in English we would say what? From what to what? From head to toe. This guy was afflicted literally, and I think this absolutely means exactly what it says. Literally in his body from head to toe. he, that's Job, took for himself a potsherd to scrape himself with, and he sat among the ashes. Where is he? I've read lots of commentary that says, you know what, he was probably in the dump. He was where people took ashes to dump him. I've read others that say he was sitting just outside somewhere where there was ashes that he could put on himself. But wherever he wasn't comfortably sitting in his house. He was sitting in the ashes, whatever that means. I personally think it probably was kind of in the city dump of the day, but I don't know that. And his wife said to him, you still maintain your integrity. Renounce God and die. Okay, now, those of you who have had any conversation with me about this are barred from this part of the conversation. Heath, that definitely means you. Chuck, that definitely means you. Okay, yeah, Mary's been to the class before. Okay, so, yeah, Allison definitely means you. Rick, Blasmo, Sister Barton. All right, what do you think of Job's wife? And we're not going to talk about her too much tonight. We're just going to dwell on this right here. Camille?
Well, looking at it from a human perspective.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. And from a woman's
You're not going to offend me. You go right ahead.
I can I mean, she's lost. She's gone through all this pain too, and she's seeing her husband suffer so
Right.
much. And she's in a depressed, worn out state herself. And in the original.
Everybody hear what Camille's saying? Okay.
I've got a big book. And in the original, it says bless God and die. Now, I know
Yep.
it was done in a caustic
Right.
way, so they were cursing.
Right.
But how that actually was said, I mean, I can understand. And he says, you speak like a foolish woman. He doesn't say you are a foolish woman. So, there's something.
You're getting ahead. We're only supposed to be talking about what she says, right? But that's okay. You're only 2 minutes away from that. Okay.
But anyway, so, I mean, I can understand that. I mean,
Right.
from an emotional, worn out, I think of Elijah and all that, and all the stuff that comes out when
Yep.
you just.
She also did have sympathy for him, you're suffering.
Yeah.
So talk louder. Say louder, Mary.
She also had some sympathy for him,
Yep.
and saw his suffering, and she's saying, just let go and get it over.
Like looking at a wounded animal, right? And you're saying, look,
Well, it's like having somebody who's terminally ill in the hospital.
death would be better than this.
You would say, you can let go, it's okay.
Right. Now, Camille brought up something really interesting. And if you look back at chapter 1, verse 9, where it says renounce. And again, Camille points out that most translations, that's probably translated curse. So in 1:9, and then again in chapter 2, verse 4, both times of Satan talking, it's the same word. It's the same word. Now that word is generally translated blessed. Believe me, I want to just get this to the Chip. I'm sorry, I'm going to say it one more time. I'm not a Hebrew expert, but this is one thing I've looked into. This is an exception, a little exception. This word is the same word. The word that Job's wife uses is the same word. So it's clear, even though it's generally used to mean bless, the way the Hebrew was written in context, it could be taken as the opposite. Clearly, Satan did not say, if you do this to Job, he will bless you to your face. Right? We know that. We know that's absolutely not what Satan meant. And there's no reason to think that that's what Job's wife meant. We know she meant, and I'll tell you, I've looked at umpteen different English translations made by people a lot smarter than me. That word is never translated blessed. So I just want to put to rest any thought that what Job's wife might have been saying was bless God and die. That is not what she was saying. I'm so tempted, but I have to stop right there. But the simple fact is, she was saying, curse God and die. Just like what Satan said to God. He said to God twice, if you do this, he will curse you to your face. He will renounce you to your face. Job's wife was saying the same thing. There's really no doubt about that.
It was because she didn't have a relationship that Job had.
Maybe. Okay, so Diana says maybe Mrs. Job. Did I tell you I call her Mrs. Job?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe Mrs. Job didn't have the same kind of confidence. Could be. Could be. What other thoughts? We have two people that are kind of sympathetic, right? What Mrs. Job said. First of all, what would you say? On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 was no big deal, 10 was that was just pretty awful, how would you put what she said? How many people think it was 8 or up?
8 or up.
8 or up, like pretty awful, at the pretty awful end of the scale.
Be like Peter, be like what Peter did.
Really close.
You're right, could be, right, Chip? Could be like what Peter did.
I also look at it that she could be like Eve.
So explain that, Chuck. She could be like Eve, did you
She could
say?
be like, yeah,
Yeah, like the tempting?
yeah, like
Yeah.
Eve tempted Adam, and
Could be.
maybe she's tempting Job.
Okay, so now,
Even if what she said is true, Peter on one hand said, "You're the Messiah." Turn around 2 verses down,
yeah,
and Jesus said, "Get away from me, Satan."
yeah,
He thought he was saying something great.
right. He expected to be commended.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
So, you know,
Camille and Marion are basically saying, look, this is Job lost the same stuff that Job lost. We can be sympathetic at least, kind of see what her plight was, and we could kind of let her off the hook for saying, I mean, it was, how many people think what she said was good advice? Okay, even I wouldn't say that. Okay, even I wouldn't say it was good advice. Okay, Ed?
Scott, even though she gave that advice, I think it's still admirable that she recognized that he still had integrity
That's true.
all the way through,
She recognized he still had integrity.
and
Thanks.
still had his relationship with God.
We're going to talk about what that word integrity means way later in the class. We're going to come back to this and talk about what that means here. Allison, you're mostly barred from this, so is what you're going to say approved?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. All right.
I have 2 things to say. For everything you're going to tell us in next week's, is it possibly longer?
Can you, I don't think I understood. You already given me 450 hours.
Everything that we're gonna hear in the last few weeks, so is the class longer later? Because
No,
you're telling us a lot of things we're gonna learn later.
you're right. I'm thinking a lot of, I'm going to have to deliver on those at some point. I won't be here the next 4 weeks. Just read this and you'll be fine. Read this 20 times and you'll have it all down. All right.
The one thought about Mrs. Joe is that I think sometimes we forget that she is a person of queer people.
You bet.
And when you see someone close to you going through something like that, but it
Yep.
affects you too,
Yep.
you can lash out at those closest to you, and it's really not their fault at all.
Yeah.
Like you're lashing,
Sure.
or why don't we just first try to get rid of this? Inside, you're just out of control and have nothing that you can grasp.
It's the closest thing. It's the closest thing to strike out at.
Right.
Yeah, it could
so
be.
it kind of makes me wonder if she really was just so
Yeah.
overwhelmed
Yeah.
that it was.
Could be.
She
Could
didn't
be.
read the book of Job. She didn't know all this.
That's right.
She had no idea what that God's trying to
In all seriousness, what Neil said right there is so interesting, and I hate to say this again, when we get to the end of the book. You know, in all seriousness, we have the benefit of seeing what happened in these first 2 chapters, right? Job didn't see any of that. Not only that, but his understanding of what happened really wasn't right as we get through the book. We're going to see that over and over again. Okay, so I want to know, and tell me your name one more time. Dave?
Yes.
All right, Dave, I want to try to get all these names down. All right, Dave.
Listening to a sermon a couple times, makes you
Listen to
wonder.
what a couple times?
A sermon.
Okay.
On Job. Makes you wonder, Satan had the authority to obviously kill family and leave somebody. It makes you cock your head a little bit.
Yeah, okay, so what Dave's saying, and this was actually on the board last week, when we made our own summary from the class of Job, Job's wife was left. She wasn't taken with the rest of the family. I think that's significant. That's all I'm going to say about that for right now. I think that's significant. I do, I think that's very significant. Now, okay, so we have 2 sort of semi-charitable views of Mrs. Job.
I think she's mad.
Think she's mad?
I think she's mad.
You mean angry or nuts?
I mean, both could apply.
Both could apply.
It's true, it's true.
Guilty by reason of insanity.
She's been through a lot.
She's
and
been
I
through a
think
lot.
that She's probably
So we're still kind of on the sympathetic track. Okay, any other opinions?
She's actually lost more than,
Explain that, Rick.
she's lost the kids and all the stuff, and she's lost him in his ability, his health. So he's not the vigorous man
Right.
wrapping his arms around her and trying to breathe. He's over in an ash pile, pretending to the source.
What does Job lose in round 3 that doesn't really appear in these first 2 chapters? Remember from last week?
All of his dignity.
What?
Dignity.
He lost his dignity, his stature. Did Mrs. Job lose those? She absolutely did.
Well, like by
Right?
association, yeah.
By association, she's tied to her husband. He used to be like this in the community. Now he's being made fun of by outcasts, by people that are described later in the book as being nuts. They're exiled on the edge of town because they're so crazy. What's that?
She wants him to die so she can get married again.
Could be. Maybe she wants to get rid of him so she can get married again. Collect the life insurance. Maybe she'd get married again. Doesn't look like anything else is going to happen with this guy, right? It's not looking good. You're right about that.
I'm glad Max is not in here.
Yeah, who's going to call Max? Someone needs to. All right. Hey, Mike, I'm glad you were in here. We're just for that, right?
He ushers me. I'll be calling him now.
All right. I want to know if anyone else has an even less charitable view of Mrs. Joe.
I have one.
Go ahead.
Maybe her behavior is more punishment for him?
You know what? A lot of the commentary I read says that.
Really?
Absolutely.
Says what?
I know it.
What'd you say, Ruby? What she said was maybe it was part of his punishment. She used the word punishment. Now, we know he's not being punished by God, but part of his calamity, right, was for her to still be there kind of needling him. Okay? So a lot of the commentary that I read even goes a step further. If you're going to go a step further than that, what might you say? Somebody actually touched on this earlier. Somebody mentioned Eve earlier. So Eve, right, was tempted by someone, and then she was practically a messenger for that person. Who? Satan. Right? So, not necessarily possessed, but I mean, Eve was lured in by the serpent, and then she went on. She got suckered into it. She went on and tempted Adam with the fruit. So, a lot of the commentary I read suggests people, and I mean, they'll write this like this is an absolute fact, that Mrs. Job was an agent of Satan. She was the last thing that Satan did to Job was to needle him with this statement, like the one person that was still left, and she was just there to needle him with this statement and be the last thing that he thought he could count on, and now he's lost not only his stuff and his health and his dignity, but now maybe the most important, only family relationship that was left. All right. We're going to go on from there, but I'm going to tell you, I have come to understand at least, I don't think I'm done yet, but right now I'm up to 11 things about Mrs. Job. 11. There are 11 things. I think, Allison, when I did the Talking Moms and Top, I was up to 9. I'm up to 11 now, so I don't think I'm done. I don't think I'm going to know when I'm done. 10 years will go by and I'll realize, you know, I'm at 15, I've been at 15 10 years, I guess I'm done. I'm at 11 right now. But we have to work our way through the book for me to show them all to you. And then some of them are literally right back here, but we have to come back here in the context and in the light of the rest of the book to see what's happening. And the whole dynamic, not just what we've read about so far, but what else we're going to finish tonight, is to me so much more interesting. You think it's interesting now. It is so much more interesting once we get through the rest of the book and understand some more things about the characters in this great spiritual cosmic play that we're reading. So let's go on from there. Job said to her, somebody touched on this, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job didn't sin with his lips. Somebody look up Matthew 5:45 for me. Somebody raise your hand and look that up for me. Okay, Bobby. Now, what do we learn there from what Job said? Somebody touched on this before. It was you, Camille. Yeah, you got ahead of us. What do we learn from there?
Well, that wasn't a normal pattern.
Everyone hearing this?
No.
What Job said was, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. What does that mean? What does that tell us? She normally didn't. That was not characteristic for her. I cannot tell you how many times I'll read something that says, Job put her in her place and told her she was foolish. That's not what he said. What he said is so much more interesting than that. What he said was, and various translations capture this in differently nuanced ways. What I like is, now you're talking like one of the foolish women. Here it says, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Clearly, Job is saying to her, you have said something foolish, and that is not like you. Now, if we go back to the charitable angle, can we really blame her? Not really. Do we know how Job said this? Do we know how she said what she said? One of the most interesting things in the scriptures to me is, how did somebody say something? There are really not a whole lot of adjectives or adverbs that relate to how things are said in the scriptures. So we really don't know just from this passage by itself. So again, in the light of the entire book, we're going to come back here again in a few weeks. And this is going to look a lot different in the light of the 11 things. But right now you know two things. One is what she said. By the way, if anyone knows something about Mrs. Job, just one thing, what is it? We touched on this last week when we wrote up on the board. What's the one thing people know? We know that now, but if somebody only knows one thing about her, Jerry, we're smarter now because we just read that. But if someone just knows one thing, remembers one thing about her, what do they remember?
Curse God and die.
Curse God and die. From that one statement, curse God and die. And I'll admit, that's damning. That statement is damning of Mrs. Job. There, I said it in church. But it is. It seems inexcusable. It seems indefensible. But that one statement, first of all, we're going to see a context for this by the end of the class that will knock your socks off. We'll look in the corner over there. All your socks will be in a mountain. They will all be knocked off in the same direction right over there. You got to come back.
Are you going to take her socks off?
We're going to take everyone's socks off. She said, but I want you to keep one thing in mind. She said two things. She said two things, not one. She said, are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die. The importance of both of those things together in the context of the whole book is you will see, it is mind-boggling. I taught this class 2.5 years ago. I had about 25 people in there. That was a good-sized class for me. I only had one person by the end that I didn't win over on Mrs. Job, so it's coming. And I was only up to 6 things when I did that class. Okay? What's that, a rate? About 2 every year, Ray? I'm gaining 2 a year. All right. So, Matthew 5:45. Bobby, what's that, Rick?
That person Sunday, he says, I think I'm getting closer.
Okay, Matthew 5:45, Bobby.
So that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven, for he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous.
All right, so it's just the idea here, shall we receive good at the hand of God and not evil? Here in Matthew, it said that God sends rain on those who do good and on those who sin, the righteous and the unrighteous, just the idea. Next page. Here's a little mile marker up there. Last week we talked about what's the one place that we have some idea where it is. Amongst Job and his 3 friends, there's one place we have a pretty good idea where it is. What was it? Anyone remember that little red dot that was on the map the whole time? It was Teman. Right? Uz, on the other hand, we have, 6 different places from different resources I looked up where maybe it could be. And I'm no geography student either, but it was all different directions, north of the city, south of the city, we don't really know. How long do we think maybe it could have been? We said last week we could make a range from 10 to how many miles? 1,000 miles. Is that helpful? Not really. So let's just say for discussion it was 300 miles. I don't really know how far it was. Let's just say for discussion it was 300 miles. We also don't know where Job's two friends lived exactly. There's some speculation on that. We're not going to look up these verses. Genesis 36 talks about Esau's children. That's where you'll see Eliphaz and Teman. Genesis 25 talks about someone named Shua, which a lot of these commentary that I've read suggests that Bildad was a descendant of Shua, and that's where the Shuites came from. I don't know. Probably so. So, Job's three friends heard of all this evil that came on him. They each came from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. All right. Those of you who are around my age or older, so 50 and up. Yeah, I gave you a little clue there, but I'm a little older than 50. 30 years ago, when we wanted to take a trip, what did we do? We got a map. Talked about that last week. We get an atlas, right? That big display at Walmart. First, we look at Tulsa, and then we look at where we're going. What map did we start with? America. We kind of get the lay of the roads. We look at the states we're going to go through. We kind of plan the cities. So, I mean, how many of you would just drive and find a place to stop kind of on the fly? Kind of an adventure, that's kind of fun. Yep. How many of you wanted to make reservations ahead of time so you knew where you were staying? You weren't going to see a no vacancy sign. Okay, when you did that 30 years ago, how'd you do that? Well, no, if you want to make reservations, what'd you do? Landline. You called ahead. How did you know what number to call? Right, so maybe you had AAA. But maybe, like our family did, every time you stayed somewhere, or every time you were near a place you hadn't stayed, you'd stop in and you'd get what from the front desk? That inch-thick book, right, that had all the states and all the cities and all the locations and smoking rooms, pet-friendly, pool, restaurant, all that stuff. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? And you would look in there and you would call ahead. There weren't no TripAdvisor. There weren't no Expedia. You know, there was 800 numbers. I'm not that old that I don't, you know, I had 800 numbers.
This is Tom.
How long did it take to figure all that out?
Call Tom Bodette.
Yeah, Tom Bodette. Tom was around then, that's right. Needed to leave the light on for you. You younger people have no idea what we're talking about. I think that's so funny. All right. Now, the other day, I made some arrangements for a trip. Our daughter's going to spend 2 months in Utah again this summer, in what I affectionately refer to as an unpaid internship for the summer. So I get online, I look at TripAdvisor, I see what the top-rated hotels are. I get on their websites, I'm checking Expedia, I'm checking their website. Sometimes one's $10 cheaper than the other one. I'm making airline reservations. I start at about 6:30 at night. What time did I get to bed? 12:30. Probably something like that, right? It's hours. It doesn't seem like hours, but I'm messing around with this for hours before I get it all done. You know what I did? I made stinking airplane reservations for 2 of us to come back, and hotel reservations in 3 places. That took me like an hour apiece. If you average all that time, it was like an hour for each of those things together. I think that's a pain in the butt. Am I allowed to say that? Is that okay? But you know what? It was pretty easy. Let's say these guys came 300 miles. We don't really know. I did check and I found out that if you were making reasonably good time and you had pack animals and stuff like that, you could go about 20 miles a day. 20 miles a day. If that's the case, how long did it take them just to get to where Job was? Right, 15 days. Yeah. I want you to read the next part of verse 11. They made an appointment together to come and sympathize with him and to comfort him. Did they have cell phones? Did they have landlines? Did they have smoke signals? Probably not as far apart as they were. How'd they do that? Messengers. That's the only way they could have done that, right? They had to send people back and forth just to make an arrangement. Like I can set up a lunch with somebody. Rick and I'll have lunch, and I'll send him an email. Here's 5 dates. Okay, 2 days later, I get an email back, how about this date? I write back, that date's gone now, how about these other dates? He writes back, well, I can't do any of those dates, how about breakfast? I'm like, I'm an old man, I can't get up that early anymore. You know, it's too much. It takes us, I mean, in these days, you got messengers, you can't really do that. Yeah, Jerry. Camel Express, like Pony Express, only camels. I can't picture a camel galloping, but I mean, it could be. Now, so this is a lot of trouble. What would we guess, right, based on what we know about Job, what would we guess about his three friends? Who were they? What were they like?
They cared.
They cared, no question about that.
I mean, they had some stature to have the ability to travel that way and find out that news. I mean, it speaks to Job's stature and the size of the calamity that the news even reached him.
Yes. So he said about three different things there. It speaks to their stature, that a person of Job's stature, what happened to him, the news reached these guys to start with. That probably took a minimum of the same 15 days. Well, again, maybe it was 3 days.
It's kind of like a head of state of the different groups. I mean, when a head of
Yeah.
state goes down, the ambassadors, whoever, they get together and they're going to go to the
Yeah.
funeral or whatever. It's kind of like, these are the heads of the state.
Right.
That where they are, and we're going to go.
These are people of some substance, right? If they're Job's friends, we know they're people of some substance. They've somehow heard what happened. It says they made an appointment to come together.
So are they friends of each other?
I suspect so. I don't know that, Julie, but I think they had to be. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made an appointment to come together. It doesn't say that, but I think it's implicit that they were. Now, what's that, Mary?
At some point, they may have visited Job together.
I think there's no question, and there's no question they knew each other somehow. They'd had time together somehow. But these three guys, what does it tell you that they made an appointment together to come and sympathize with him? They made an appointment together to come and sympathize. What does that tell you?
They were true friends.
They were true friends. Why? You're right, but why? Right? This is a nuance, but I want you to get into where I'm seeing this. They didn't come one at a time. They didn't say, "Oh, we should visit him sometime." That's too bad. You know, we hear of somebody in the hospital, right? And we say, my thought is, I should go see them. 2 hours later, I've forgotten about it. They didn't forget about it. And they didn't say, "When are you going to go? I'll come another time." They said, "We should go together. We should make an arrangement to meet somewhere and show up to see this guy together." What does that tell you about them, and what does that tell you about Job's importance to them?
Maybe they thought it would have more impact if all three of them were there at once. Their message or their advice would have more weight.
And now Kathy says something interesting here. What do we think that their message and their advice was at this stage in chapter 2? Isn't that interesting? We know, you saw the overall map last week of what actually happened. We're going to get to that next week. But why they came, you know what? This is the Word of God. It's telling us why they came. They didn't come to give him a hard time. They came to sympathize, depending on the version, and comfort him. Some versions say they came to mourn or grieve or something like that. But they came out of a heartfelt loyalty and friendship with this man. That's why they came. Yeah, Ruby.
I think in compassion, they felt that he's had this devastating, overwhelming loss, and they wanted each other for support because they may have been at a loss for words.
Could be. Well, they weren't at a loss for words. I'd have to differ with you on that.
They may have felt, at the time, they may have felt, when they heard of Joseph's massive loss, they may have felt, wow, what do we say to somebody
Could be.
who lost 10 kids and
Could
all
be.
his animals?
The fact is, one way or another, they didn't show up haphazardly. They didn't come one at a time. They didn't say, "You go see him and let me know what it was like." They decided to meet together. That very fact, there weren't no cell phones. I mean, there wasn't any internet to make plane reservations on. Sending messengers back and forth to figure out where are we going to meet, when are we going to meet, what do they have to bring with them? Did they have Quick Trip to stop at on the way? On top of that, what was travel like then? Was there highway patrol to stop camels from going more than, 3 miles an hour? There wasn't any of that stuff. This was a huge undertaking for these three guys. And it is absolutely demonstrative of their commitment and their loyalty to their friend. So when I read stuff, I told you I've got 6 books, I'm up to 6 books. Some of them I get to the point where it's just railing on his friends. I just stop reading. Now, we're going to get to what they said. In fact, the whole point of the book, honestly, the whole point of the book, or one of the major points of the book, is what they said. That's one of the whole thrust of the book, is what they said and how wrong it was. But don't tell me they weren't well-meaning. I think these are the kind of friends all of us would like to have. Guys they had stuff to do. They had holdings, they had stature, and they dropped that. They made an arrangement to come together. They had to pack all this stuff up. I can only imagine it. But this was a big undertaking for them. They met together, and let's keep going. I'm going to run it because I got to get through chapter 3. Chapter 3 is actually pretty short. It's not short, but getting through it will be pretty short. But I got to keep going here. Look at again, at the end of 11, they came to sympathize and comfort. When they lifted their eyes from a distance, they didn't recognize him. Now they saw him, they knew it was him, and they could not recognize him. He was so disfigured, which we saw last week. They raised their voices and wept. Each tore his robe and sprinkled dust on their heads toward the sky. They sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. How long is 7 days?
168 hours.
How many?
168 hours.
168 hours. How many of you could sit with somebody for 1 hour? 1 hour and not say anything? 100, to your point, Carlene, 168 hours. 7 days and 7 nights. Just one second, Jerry. How bad of friends were these guys? I think these guys were very good friends. Not only that, but I will let another tiny kitten out of the bag. God is a genius for setting us up with these particular guys. This book would not work without these 3 particular guys. And we're going to see that through the rest of the book. You can't have the book without these 3 guys. God did that. Jerry, real quickly.
I was just wondering if when they decided to come, when they first heard about his other losses, or after he lost everything.
Don't know.
And then that tells me that his grief was for a real, seems to be an extended period of time before the time for them to get together and all that. So
Yeah. Yes.
Suffering for a long period of time.
Yeah, so let's extrapolate that for just a minute. If we assume for a moment, and again, this could be way off, but let's just take an average of some of the numbers we saw last week. Let's say it was 300 miles. We don't know where all the 3 friends lived. Some of them may have lived close to Job, we don't really know. So let's say each of these trips was 300 miles, just to put a number on it. So for one messenger to go from, let's say, Bildad to Eliphaz and back, if that was 300 miles, how long did that take him to do, there and back? 30 days. Just to go there one time and back. Just what I say to Rick, how about these dates for lunch? And Rick writes back and says, I'll pick this one. That took 30 days for them to do that. 30 days. Now what if the other guy said, I'm busy that day? Somehow I don't think that's what he said. But let's just say you got at least 30 days just for this to happen. You probably have another 15 days for word of what happened to Job to get from where he was. It didn't go any faster. You've got 15 days for word of what happened to Job from where he was just to get to where the friends were. Again, this could have been 60 days. It could have been 5 days. Let's just say 15 just to talk about it. We know it was a lot of days. It was a lot more days than we're used to. We would think it was an inconvenience to spend 2 hours driving somewhere to see somebody in the hospital. These guys, it took weeks to put this together. Then they come to see Job. That's a minimum of another 15 days, again, using our 300 miles. Minimum time, how long?
2 months.
2 months. And if you will look at, give me 1 second here. in chapter 7, I think. Someone look up Job 7:3. It's actually in your outline, or you can look up in the Bible. Somebody find that and just shout it out real quick.
So in my allotted months of vanity and nights of trouble,
So Job is, well, one of the things he says to his friends, I've been allotted months of trouble. So we can guess from that passage, there's a little clue that it probably was at least 2 months between the time all this stuff happened to him and the friends came. He's probably been dealing with this suffering for at least 2 months. It just says months. We don't know if it's 10 months, 6 months, but it's more than 1 month. Whatever a month is, it's more than 1 month. So it's probably at least 2 months. Could be quite a bit longer. All right, we're going to cover very quickly, which we can do, chapter 3. If you look on page 6 of your sessions 1 and 2 outline. For the next 2 weeks, would it be okay with you guys if I talk at twice this pace? Because it's going to take that to get through the rest of the book that we have to get through. I will warn you, I will strongly encourage you to read the book, even in your own Bible or in these notes that you're going to get during the course of the class. We will not have time to go into this much depth on the next 39 chapters. Not only that, but we have to come back to the first 2 chapters, particularly at the end. We have to come back there and dwell on these again. So we're going to basically try to get through most of the rest of the book in about the next 2.5 weeks. And we're going to work through it very, very quickly, just touching on major themes. Yeah, you have to go quick.
Yes. All right, these questions you get back here, is that an assignment or is that to be filled out in class? I just did this an assignment.
My intention was we would go through those at the end of class. You can just tear them up and throw them out. We're not gonna... Yeah, I thought we would get to those, but what I would encourage you to do, basically, I'm thinking that after our discussion tonight, you should be able to write an answer in for most of those questions, if not all of them, that are at the end of the sessions 1 and 2 part of the outline. So do your best over the next week to write them in. If you have questions, come see me at dinner or before class next week. Next week, again, we're going to have to hustle to get through the next 39 chapters of the book in about the next 2.5 weeks. It would be better, but Rick only let me have 6 weeks this time. It's all his fault. Talk to him after class. He's right back there. He's the guy that's turning red right now. All right. Page 6.
You're the guy that said it's plenty of time.
Yeah, you know what? I did say that too. I think Satan was tempting me right there. Plenty of time. All right. I want you to listen here to what Job says. Now, remember the context that we're at right here. Job's friends have arrived. They've been there for a week. They've sat with him on the ground, and they have said what? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You know, my mind is just blown every turn in this book. You read these words in black and white, and you're reading, and you kind of skip past them, and your mind wanders off. That's what happens to me. That's what happened to me for the first 20 years of reading this book. That is mind-blowing. 7 days, 7 nights, saying nothing.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yeah.
I read somewhere that was a Jewish custom, that when you go to someone's situation, that you don't speak until he speaks.
Yeah, I've also read that, and that may very well be true, because Job did speak first. So it may be that they didn't speak because Job hadn't spoken yet. Now, custom or not, how long is 7 days? Right? That's a long stinking time. I don't know about you guys. I would have said something on about the 2nd day. Right? Like Job, we're waiting. Aren't you going to say something? Right? Let's get on with whatever it is you want to say. Say it. So, 7 days. I think you may be right, Diana, but 7 days. I don't want you to miss the significance. No matter whether it was custom or not, why they didn't speak. The fact is they sat there for 7 days, 7 nights, didn't say a word. I will tell you, later we'll see a little bit of evidence of this. I don't think they were completely silent, but I think they said nothing to Job. I think they probably ate, they probably drank water, they probably relieved themselves. How long can you really go without going? Right? 7 days is a long time. And I think they probably had a little whispering chit-chat with themselves off on the side. I don't think they were sitting hands and knees on the ground for 7 days in a row. I think they slept and all that. But the point is, as it relates to Job, they said nothing. They did nothing but sit there with him and be there for him for 7 days. That's all I can say about that right now. We're going to come back to this at the end of the class. I want you to look at this. We're going to go through this very quickly. Job chapter 3. After this, Job opened up his mouth and cursed the day he was born. He spoke up and said, just listen to this next verse. Let the day on which I was born perish, and the night that said a man has been conceived. What is he really saying there? What's a paraphrase of what he is saying? It's even beyond that. It's even beyond that, I think. But you're on the right track, Neil. What's he saying? It even goes back further than that.
Wished he'd never been conceived.
He wished he'd never been conceived. Right? He wished he'd never existed to be born. So what he's really saying in verse 1 through 10 of chapter 3 is, I wish I had never been conceived. Read the rest of it at home. It's worth reading. It's not deep. It's a complaint. It's a lament out of the man's soul. But it's not hard to get your brain wrapped around. We don't have to come back to this at the end of the class. He's saying, I wish I'd never been conceived. Look at verse 11. Why did I not die at birth? And why did I not expire as I came out of the womb? What's he saying there?
If I had to have been conceived, at least I could have died before I was.
Say that louder.
If I had to have been conceived, at least I could have died when I was born.
At least I could have been stillborn. Having been, so the first thing he says is, I wish I'd never been conceived. Having been conceived, I wish I had been stillborn. I wish I had known nothing of life. All right, that's what he basically says next. He talks about, I just think this is interesting. If you look at 13, 14, and 15, I would be asleep and then at peace with kings and counselors of the earth, who built for themselves places now desolate. Psalm 146, 3 and 4 says, do not put your trust in princes and human beings who cannot save. When their spirit departs, they return to the ground. On that very day, their plans come to nothing. It's just so strikingly similar to me. There's lots of other places where I put verses that I think are very reminiscent, very similar. I'm not saying they're of any theological significance, I just think they're interesting. That's what that verse is there. So part 2, Job is basically saying, I wish I'd been stillborn. Those little boxes there that have the 0 with the line through it, if I remember way back from that, isn't that like the symbol for the empty set? So that's a symbol I chose for death. And you'll see that symbol. You're going to get a whole guide to all these crazy symbols and letters at the end of the class. It's going to tie all these things together you see in the outline. That one is where Job wishes he was dead, and he wishes for that in chapter 3 and beyond. We'll see that many times through the book. On the next page, why does God give light to one who is in misery and life to those whose soul is bitter? Those who wait for death that does not come and search for death more than for hidden treasures, who rejoice even to jubilation and are exultant when they find the grave. What's he saying there? Yeah.
In today's vernacular, you're saying somebody just shoot me.
Kind of basically it's pretty close to that. So first he's saying, I wish I'd never been conceived. Then he says, I wish I'd been stillborn. What's he saying now? I wish I was dead right now. I wish I was dead now. Having lived to this point, I wish I'd never been conceived. I wish I'd never lived to this point. Having lived to this point, I wish I could just die. I wish I was dead right now. That's really what he said. Who do you think he's been speaking to in chapter 3? This is another thing I think is really interesting, and you're going to see a box like that at many points in the outline. Again, it's not necessarily theologically significant. I just think it's a very interesting feature of the book. Job has at least 3 different audiences that he talks to at various times. And you'll see that box as we go through the book just as a prompt to think about who is it he's talking to right there. So what do you think? Who's he talking to right there?
His friends.
Could be his friends, could be God, and who else could it be? I think there's 3 different audiences as you go through the book. Could be his wife. Could be, you know what? We're going to also see through the book, it's likely, I think, that there were some other people assembled to see this. I don't think it was just Job and these 3 guys. There's a younger guy also, but I think there were other people there. There are hints of that through the book, and I think he's just kind of saying it to anyone who's there. It doesn't really say right here, and it's not clear from the context. I think he's just, you know what, he's finally opened his mouth. This is the utterance from the deepest part of his soul, the deepest part of his longing. This is what he's been wishing for probably for 2 months plus a week. And that's what he says. So, with that, I would strongly encourage you, please work through the questions. They weren't supposed to be homework. As usual, I'm trying to pack 3 hours of stuff into a 1.5-hour class. My fault, but we're out of time. We will not take time next week to go through the questions because we won't have it. Please go through them over the next week if you want, completely optional. Neil, I promise you there won't be any homework. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. Let me close our time in prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for each person here. I thank you for Job. I thank you for Mrs. Job. I thank you for his friends. And I thank you for what I think you have showed me in this book and what I am so excited to share with the rest of this class, with these people who are giving me dozens, hundreds of hours of their time. I thank you for them, their willingness to do that, and I ask that you would bless them mightily for it. Jesus, I ask all this in your name. Amen.